Seoul had a ghost story, and his name was Jaevian Seo. Nobody talked about him the way they talked about other billionaires, with envy or admiration or gossip about whose wife he was sleeping with. They talked about him quietly, the way people talk about accidents they witnessed and never recovered from. He was 37 now, heir to Seo Dominion Group, one of the most powerful conglomerates in Korea. He had more money than most countries had patience. And for 10 years, he had shown up to exactly 3 types of events: business meetings, funerals, and situations where someone needed to be financially destroyed. That was it. No galas, no charity dinners, no birthday parties where he'd smile for cameras and pretend he was fine. The rumors about him were everywhere. Women cried after seeing his scars up close for the first time. Not from sadness, from shock. He had fired a senior executive for grabbing his arm unexpectedly during a handshake. He slept 3 hours a night, maximum. And every single year, on the anniversary of the fire, he went back to the ruins of the hotel alone. No security, no staff, just him and whatever he carried in his chest that nobody was allowed to see. Inside Velvet Hour, the dancers had turned him into a dare. You go over there. No, you go? He tipped higher in 10 million won last month just to leave him alone. That's not a tip, that's a restraining order payment. He sat in the VIP section like he was attending his own execution. Glass of scotch he hadn't touched. Jaw tight, eyes forward, but not really looking at anything. The suit he wore probably cost more than the entire bar's monthly revenue, and he sat in it like it was a punishment. Zylah Winters noticed him the second she stepped out from backstage. Not because of the scars, she'd heard about those. Not because of the money. She noticed him because every single person in that room was performing happiness, and he was the only one who wasn't even trying. He didn't look dangerous. He looked devastated. She stood at the edge of the stage watching him for a full 30 seconds while her set music started. One of the other girls grabbed her wrist. Don't. Zylah pulled free. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain exactly why she did it. Pity wasn't it. She didn't feel sorry for him. She felt something closer to recognition, like seeing someone sitting alone at a party they didn't want to attend and understanding exactly how that felt. She crossed the room during her set. Security saw her moving toward him, and 2 of them stood up immediately. She ignored them completely, walked straight to Jaevian Seo, and sat directly in his lap like she'd been doing it for years. The entire club stopped breathing. Phones came out. His security moved forward. Jaevian went completely still. Not angry still. More like someone had pressed pause on him, and he hadn't loaded back yet. His hands stayed at his sides. He stared at her like she was something that had malfunctioned. She leaned close to his ear. You know, if you glare any harder, the champagne's gonna file a restraining order. Silence. Then Jaevian Seo laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It wasn't the controlled, professional exhale rich men use when they want to seem approachable. It came out of him like it surprised him too, sudden and real, and slightly broken around the edges. Like something that had been locked in a room for a very long time and finally got out. The whole room went silent. Nobody had heard that sound in public in 10 years. Someone filmed it. Of course someone filmed it. By morning, the club owner had leaked the footage to 3 different media outlets, and by noon, it was everywhere. The stripper who made the scarred billionaire laugh. Korea lost its mind. That same night, across the city, Zylah sat in her apartment eating ramen and watching her phone fill up with notifications she didn't ask for. Her face was in every clip. Her name was already trending. She turned her phone face down. In his penthouse 40 floors above Seoul, Jaevian sat alone in the dark and pressed play on a voicemail he hadn't listened to in years. Seraphine's voice filled the room. Jay, I was trying to tell you something important. I think I'm preg. Static. Screaming. Nothing. He'd heard it hundreds of times. He knew every second of it. But tonight, for the first time, he heard something underneath the static he had never noticed before. A second voice. If this story already has you hooked, you're not alone. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me. Team Zylah or Team Chaos? Because honestly, same thing. Now let's keep going. Jaevian came back the next night. And the night after that. By the 4th night, the staff at Velvet Hour had stopped acting surprised and started placing his usual scotch at the VIP table before he arrived. Nobody sat near him. Nobody looked directly at him for too long. The other dancers had collectively decided that whatever was happening between him and Zylah was not their business, their problem, or their survival instincts concern. Zylah had a different theory about why he kept coming back. She ran through the options practically. He wanted to own her. Possible. He wanted to sleep with her. Also possible. He wanted some kind of revenge for the public embarrassment. Very possible. She was ready for all three. What she was not ready for was him sitting next to her in the staff break room at midnight watching her eat fries with the energy of someone who had nowhere else to be and no explanation for why he was there. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I'm observing." "That's just staring with a college degree." He said nothing. She ate another fry. He watched her dip it in ketchup with the focused attention most men reserve for stock markets. "Do you want one?" she asked. "No." "Then why do you look like you're personally invested in this fry?" "I'm not." "Okay." She ate it. "You're still staring. You're still talking." That was roughly how every conversation went between them for the first 2 weeks. Combat that didn't go anywhere. Back and forth that felt like sparring without anyone actually landing a hit. She mocked his reputation constantly, loudly, in front of whoever was standing nearby. He didn't flinch, didn't threaten her. Just watched her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not quite amusement, not quite frustration. Something between the two that she didn't have a name for. One night a drunk customer grabbed her arm and refused to let go. Before security reached them, Jaevian was already standing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't touch the man. He just looked at him. The man let go immediately and left the building. "I didn't need that," Zylah said. "I know." "Then why?" "He was hurting you." She opened her mouth, closed it. He walked back to his table and picked up his scotch like nothing happened. She hated how much sense that made. The night things shifted was entirely Zylah's fault, and she would admit that. They'd argued in his penthouse. She couldn't even remember what it started about. Something about him paying for damages when she accidentally knocked a display shelf over at the club, and her telling him to stop spending money on her like she was a problem to manage. The argument went in circles. She had wine. More wine than she intended. And somewhere around 2 a.m., mid-sentence about financial independence, she fell asleep on his couch. Just like that. Mid-argument. Gone. Jaevian sat across from her for a long time. She'd fallen asleep with one hand near her face and her shoes still on, and her body completely relaxed, the way people only sleep when they don't feel threatened. At some point in the night, she shifted toward him. Her hand ended up resting against his arm, the scarred side, the one people avoided touching, the one that had made a woman physically recoil from him 4 years ago. Zylah didn't recoil. She was asleep. She didn't even know. But she didn't move away. Jaevian didn't sleep at all that night. He sat completely still and let her hand stay there, and felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. Not happiness exactly. More like the moment right before you remember you're allowed to exist. Madame Solène found them like that at 6 in the morning when she arrived for her shift. She walked in, saw the situation, pressed both hands to her face, looked directly up at the ceiling, and whispered, "Finally." Then she immediately began engineering the rest of their lives. The wine cellar incident happened 3 days later. The lock malfunctioned. They were inside for 2 hours. Madame Solène stood on the other side of the door eating a sandwich and pretending to make phone calls about a locksmith who was apparently perpetually 20 minutes away. The fake plumbing emergency lasted an entire weekend. The loudly whispered prayer for grandchildren happened every single morning at a volume that was not, in any way, a whisper. "She's doing this on purpose," Zylah told Jaevian flatly. "Yes," he agreed. "And you're letting her." He looked at her. "She's 74. What exactly do you want me to do?" Zylah had no answer for that. She was starting to not have answers for a lot of things where Jaevian was concerned, and that bothered her more than she let on. She had rules. No attachments. No permanence. No letting someone matter so much that losing them became a disaster. She'd watched her mother die too young and too suddenly, and she'd spent every year since then making sure nothing in her life was too heavy to put down quickly. Jaevian Seo was becoming heavy. She was thinking about that, standing at the edge of the stage on a Thursday night, when she looked out at the entrance and saw someone she hadn't seen in 2 years walk through the door. Malric Vane. He found her immediately in the crowd, the way he always did. And he smiled at her, slow, certain, completely unbothered, like he'd simply stepped out for a while and was now back to collect something that belonged to him. Malric didn't threaten Zylah immediately. That wasn't how he operated. First he was charming. Showed up at Velvet Hour 2 nights in a row, sat in the general section, tipped well, smiled at her from across the room like they were old friends reconnecting after a mild disagreement. He sent a drink to her dressing room with a note that said just wanted to say hi. He waved at her once from the parking lot when she was leaving. Normal behavior, if you didn't know him. Zylah knew him. She knew what the charm meant. It meant he was building something, stacking up evidence of his own reasonableness before he needed it, so that later, when things got bad, he could point to the drinks and the notes and the friendly waves and say, I was perfectly civil. She's unstable. She misunderstood. The threat started on day 4. Nothing dramatic. A text at 2 a.m. that said you looked good tonight. Don't make me remind you who you belong to. A photo of her outside her apartment building, taken from a distance, no message attached. Him appearing at a restaurant where she was eating with 2 other dancers and sitting down uninvited and talking loudly about how much he'd missed her while gripping her wrist under the table hard enough to leave a mark. She wore long sleeves to work the next 3 days. Jaevian noticed on the second day. He didn't say anything immediately. He just watched her pull her sleeve down when she reached for something, and his expression shifted in a way that was hard to look at directly. Not anger yet. Something colder than anger. Who did that? He said. Not a question. I bumped into something. He looked at her for a long time. Zylah. Drop it. He dropped it. But he made a phone call that night that she wasn't supposed to know about, and by morning 2 of Malrik's business accounts had been frozen, and his lease on his sole apartment was mysteriously under review. Zylah found out and screamed at him for 40 minutes. Jaevian listened to all 40 minutes without apology. Outside their private war, the media was running full speed with the viral footage. Someone had identified Zylah within 48 hours of the clip going public. Old photos surfaced, some professional, some not. A gossip outlet ran a piece titled The Velvet Hour Girl. Who is she really? That included her hometown, her mother's death, and 3 photos she never consented to. Elite society had opinions. Loud ones. She wasn't appropriate. She wasn't educated enough. She wasn't Korean. She wasn't the right background or the right profession or the right anything for a man like Jaevian Seo. Jaevian read every article. Then he had his legal team send letters to 4 publications simultaneously and personally called the editor of one outlet at 6 a.m. to explain in quiet, specific detail what financial ruin felt like from the inside. He did not explain himself to society. He did not issue a statement or distance himself or look embarrassed at her profession. He simply stood near her and let anyone who had a problem with it figure out what to do with his eye contact. The possessiveness escalated fast. At a small industry event she attended with him, she still wasn't sure how she agreed to that. A man she'd briefly spoken to earlier put his hand on her lower back to guide her through a crowd. Casual, thoughtless, the kind of gesture men made without thinking. Jaevian removed the man's hand. Then he looked at him and said, in front of everyone nearby, touch her again, and I'll make sure your company doesn't survive next quarter. He wasn't loud. He wasn't emotional. He said it the way someone states a fact they've already confirmed. The clip was online within the hour, trending by midnight. Zylah waited until they were alone in his car to detonate. You can't do that. You don't own me. I'm not your property, and I'm not your dead fiancé's replacement either. So stop acting like keeping me locked down fixes whatever broke in you 10 years ago. She watched it land. She saw him go still. Then he grabbed her face and kissed her so hard and so desperately that she forgot what she'd been saying. It wasn't romantic. It was a man who had been holding something in for years and finally ran out of room to keep holding it. All the grief and the rage and the longing came out at once, and she felt all of it. Afterward, they both sat there breathing. I know I'm not her, she said quietly. I know you're not, he said. That's not why he stopped. Started again. You're not a replacement. You're the first person in 10 years who made me want to still be here. She didn't answer. Later that night, he had a panic attack in his bedroom. Chest tight, hands shaking, unable to breathe properly. She found him on the bathroom floor and sat down next to him without making it dramatic. Just sat there and talked at him about nothing until his breathing slowed. His shirt had come open. She saw the scars fully for the first time. All of them. The burns across his chest and up his neck, the ruined texture of skin that had been reconstructed over years. She reached out and put her hand against his chest. He went completely rigid. You survived this, she said. That's all I see. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he stood up, and instead of walking to his bedroom, he walked to the end of the hall. To the door nobody opened. He stood in front of it with his back to her. Come here, he said. The room smelled like perfume that had been sitting still for 10 years. Not faded. Present. Like someone had spritzed it into the air that morning and then simply never came back. Zylah stood in the doorway and took it in slowly. Seraphine's drafting table was against the far wall, architectural sketches spread across it mid-project, pencil resting on top like she'd stepped away to get coffee. Her coat hung on a hook near the window. A half-empty perfume bottle sat on the dresser beside a jewelry tray with 2 rings still in it. On the nightstand on Jaevian's side of the room, and she knew it was his side because it faced the door, there was a framed sheet of paper. Printed call logs. 17 of them. All from the same number. All from the same night. Zylah looked at it for a long time and didn't say anything. She called 17 times while she was trapped, Jaevian said from behind her. His voice was flat. Controlled. I was unconscious. Security had already pulled me out. I didn't get any of them until I woke up in the hospital. The voicemail, Zylah said. She was pregnant. He said it simply. No dramatic pause. Just the words, dropped into the room like something he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what putting it down felt like. She was calling to tell me. I don't know how far along. I never found out. Everything burned. Zylah sat down on the edge of the bed. This was the thing she hadn't understood until right now. She'd known about Seraphine. She'd known Jaevian loved her, grieved her, built his entire personality around surviving her absence. But she'd thought, somewhere in the back of her mind, she'd thought she was competing with a love story. She wasn't competing with a love story. She was standing next to a man who believed he killed his fiancée and his unborn child by being unconscious, who had spent 10 years deciding that was what he deserved to carry. That was different. That was not something you kissed away. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She didn't say anything healing or useful. She just sat with him in the room that hadn't moved in a decade and let it be what it was. That night, he had the nightmare. She heard him from the guest room. A sharp sound. Then nothing. Then his voice saying Seraphine's name twice in a row with a panic in it that she felt in her chest. She went to his room without thinking about it. He was awake when she got there, sitting up, hands gripping the sheets, breathing like he'd been running. She sat next to him. He grabbed onto her arm, not gently, like she was something solid in a room with no floor. I've got you, she said. I'm here. He didn't let go. She stayed. She didn't make it soft or poetic. She just stayed there, one hand over his, and eventually his breathing slowed, and then he was asleep, and she was still there. In the morning, Madame Solène found them and said absolutely nothing, which was more meaningful than anything she could have said out loud. The weeks after that were not simple. They cooked together and burned everything. Jaevian had apparently never learned to cook a single thing that wasn't instant noodles, and Zylah's confidence in the kitchen was not backed up by any actual skill. They ate burned rice twice and ordered delivery and argued about whether delivery food counted as admitting defeat. He was jealous constantly. She tested him constantly. They fought loudly and often and then stood there after, both unwilling to be the first one to walk away. She told him about her mother one night without planning to. How she died at 33 and nobody understood why. How Zylah had spent years quietly calculating her own odds. How she had never planned more than 6 months ahead because planning ahead assumed she'd be there for it. Jaevian listened to all of it without trying to fix it. Then he said, "You're 28. I know. You don't know you're going to die young. I don't know I'm not." He looked at her with something in his face she didn't want to name because naming it made it real. 3 days later, a package arrived at his penthouse. No return address. Inside was a photograph, a one-page medical document, and a handwritten note that said, "She didn't die in the fire." The photograph was grainy but clear enough. A woman sitting outside a cafe in what looked like Prague. Dark hair. One side of her jaw visibly scarred. She was looking away from the camera, but the angle caught enough of her profile that the resemblance was immediate and violent. Jaevian held the photo for a long time without speaking. Zylah watched him hold it and felt her stomach drop to the floor. By the next morning, someone had leaked similar images online. 3 photos, different locations across Europe, same woman. The internet did not wait for confirmation. Within 6 hours, #SeraphineAlive was trending in 4 countries. Media outlets that hadn't touched the Seo family story in years came back to it hard and fast. Old articles about the fire resurfaced. Old questions too. Why had the emergency exits failed? Who had signed off on the last safety inspection? Why had the investigation closed so quickly? Lady Seo called Jaevian at 7 a.m. and spoke for 11 minutes straight. Zylah was in the kitchen when he took the call. She couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone. Controlled, cold, instructions being delivered like they were facts. When he came back into the room, his face was closed. "She wants me to release a statement saying the photos are fabricated," he said. "Are they?" He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. He hired a private investigator the same day. Then a second one. Then a forensic photo analyst. He started making calls at midnight to contacts in Europe. He pulled up every record connected to the fire that he'd been given access to and started going through them again from the beginning. Zylah watched all of it. She understood, intellectually, that he was trying to find out the truth. She understood this was not simple for him. She understood that if Seraphine had survived and disappeared and he never knew, that was a horror she couldn't fully calculate. She understood all of that, and she still lay awake at 3 a.m. feeling like she was disappearing. Malric watched the entire media spiral from a safe distance and said nothing publicly. Privately, he sent Zylah a text that said, "Rough week. I'm here if you need someone who was always actually yours." She didn't respond. He sent another one 2 hours later with a link to an article about the fire that included Seraphine's full name, age, and a photo of her and Jaevian together at the engagement announcement. Seraphine had been beautiful, soft-looking, educated, accomplished, the daughter of a French-Korean family with their own substantial reputation. Zylah put her phone face down and went to work. The banquet happened 10 days into the chaos, when everything was already stretched to breaking and neither of them was sleeping enough. It was a formal Seo family dinner, the kind of event where attendance wasn't optional and every seat placement was deliberate. Zylah wore a dress she'd borrowed and sat where she was directed and kept her face neutral. Jaevian's aunt started it. Not loudly. That would have been too obvious. She did it in the way wealthy, cruel people do things, quietly, with a smile, in sentences that required you to explain why they were offensive before anyone else would believe you. "It must be so interesting for you," she said to Zylah, attending these things. Completely new world. His cousin joined in. "We saw the old photos online. You were very brave to let those circulate." Then his uncle looked across the table and said, with complete calm, "Seraphine sat in that chair for 3 years. She was at every one of these dinners. Extraordinary woman. Jaevian, you remember how she handled your grandfather's 80th? Remarkable grace." The table went quiet. Everyone looked at Jaevian. He looked at his uncle. 2 seconds passed. 3, 4. Then he said, "That's enough." But he said it 4 seconds too late. Zylah had counted. She sat very still for the rest of the dinner and said nothing and smiled when smiled at and ate what was placed in front of her. In the car going home, she stared out the window. "Zylah, don't. I should have said something faster. I know that." "You hesitated," she said. "You sat there and you hesitated and everyone at that table saw it." "I saw it." He didn't deny it. She turned and looked at him directly. "If Seraphine walked through a door right now, alive, would you still choose me?" The car was silent. Jaevian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He didn't answer that night. Not in the car. Not when they got home. Not when she sat on the edge of the bed waiting. And not when she finally stopped waiting and went to the guest room and closed the door. He stood outside that door for 20 minutes and didn't knock. I need you to understand what that silence cost her. Zylah had spent her entire adult life not attaching to people for exactly this reason. She knew what it felt like to love something temporary. She'd watched her mother die and learned early that nothing stayed. So she'd built her whole life around not needing things to stay. And then she'd needed him to stay. And he'd hesitated. They didn't speak properly for 3 days. They existed in the same space, his penthouse, his orbit, his world, and moved around each other carefully. He watched her. She refused to be watched. Their conversations were short and functional and loaded with everything neither of them was saying. Then on the 4th night, they had the fight. It started about something small, her leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor, which was not what it was actually about, and escalated in under 4 minutes to everything real. "You want me to wait around while you decide if a dead woman is actually dead?" she said. "That's what you're asking me to do." "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm trying to find out the truth. The truth about whether you want her back." "That's not," he stopped. "This is not fair, Zylah. I know it's not fair. None of this is fair. You pulled me into this, and now I'm standing here competing with someone I can't even argue with because she's either dead or she's gone, and either way she wins. Nobody is winning anything. You hesitated, she said again. In front of your whole family. In front of people who were humiliating me to my face. You hesitated. What am I supposed to do with that? He crossed the room and stood directly in front of her. I hesitated because I froze, he said. Not because I chose them. Not because I chose her. Because I have spent 10 years unable to defend anything, and I froze for 4 seconds, and I will spend the rest of my life hating myself for it, if you need me to. But I am not going to stand here and let you tell me I don't love you. She was shaking. He was shaking. Neither of them moved. Then her phone rang. She looked at it. Maurik. She rejected the call. It rang again. She turned her phone over. Jaevian's jaw tightened. It was 2 hours later, when she was leaving the club after her shift, that Maurik appeared. He wasn't charming this time. There was nobody around to perform for. He grabbed her arm in the parking lot and put her back against a car and told her quietly and specifically what he planned to do if she didn't stop embarrassing him by being publicly attached to another man. She didn't scream. She went very still the way she'd learned to go still with him and looked for the fastest way out. Then Maurik was gone. Not because she moved. Because Jaevian had him by the collar against the same car with his forearm across his throat and a look on his face that wasn't anger anymore. It was past anger. Something that had no heat left in it at all. Security pulled him back before it went further. Maurik left. Fast. Zylah stood there and looked at Jaevian still breathing hard, hands at his sides now, and understood something clearly. He would have actually hurt Maurik badly. Not as a show. Not as a warning. He would have done it because she was scared, and that was simply unacceptable to him. She took his hand and took him home. In his bedroom, she reached up and opened the buttons of his shirt herself. He went still immediately, the same way he always did when the scars became visible, waiting for her reaction, prepared for it. She put both hands against his chest and looked at everything she hadn't seen fully until now. All the ruined skin, all the years written on his body. Then she leaned in and pressed her mouth against his shoulder. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a decade. What happened next was not perfect. It was desperate and overwhelming and completely real. No performance. No distance. Just two people who had been through enough that pretending wasn't possible anymore. Afterward, in the dark, he said it. I love you. Not dramatically. Just true. She listened to him fall asleep. She lay there beside him in the quiet and felt, for the first time, like something in her life was real. Then she saw his laptop open on the nightstand. An email notification visible on the screen. A subject line that read, Confirmed survivor, Seraphine Velour, Marseille Clinic 2019. She left before the sun came up. No note. No text. No explanation sitting on the kitchen counter for him to find. She picked up her shoes at the door, walked out of his penthouse, and disappeared into a city of 10 million people like she'd never been there at all. Jaevian woke up at 6 a.m. to an empty bed and a laptop notification he hadn't opened yet, and the immediate, physical understanding that something was wrong. He checked every room. Twice. Then he stood in the middle of his living room in silence and understood what had happened. She'd seen the email. She'd read the subject line. And she'd made a decision without asking him a single question. He called her. She didn't pick up. He called again. And again. 12 times before 7 a.m. Then he stopped calling and just sat on the floor against the bed with his phone in both hands trying to think clearly, which he could not do. For the record, she left because she loved him. I want you to hold that. She didn't leave because she was selfish or irrational. She left because she saw a confirmed survivor notification with Seraphine's name on it, and she decided, alone, in the dark, that staying would be the cruelest thing she could do to him. She thought she was giving him back something he'd lost. What she actually did was take the one thing, keeping him functional. By day 2 he wasn't sleeping. Not struggling to sleep. Not sleeping lightly. Not sleeping at all. He sat at his desk going through every piece of evidence connected to Seraphine's case files, and called his investigators at 3 a.m. and stood on his balcony at 4 a.m. staring at Seoul like it owed him something. Madame Solène arrived on the third morning and found him unshaved, visibly hollowed out, replaying Zylah's voice messages on his phone with the volume low. Not Seraphine's. Zylah's. The one where she'd called him an overcomplicated disaster while laughing. The one where she'd left a 30-second voicemail complaining about his refrigerator having no real food in it. Madame Solène sat across from him and said nothing for a while. Then she said, When did you last eat something? I'm not hungry. That wasn't a question about hunger. He put the phone down. She saw the email about Seraphine. I know. She thinks he stopped. She thinks I still want Seraphine. Madame Solène looked at him steadily. Do you? He didn't answer immediately, and she waited him out the way she'd been waiting him out since he was 9 years old and stubborn about everything. Seraphine is dead, he finally said. That's not what I asked. He pressed his hands against his face. I loved her. She was mine, and I couldn't save her, and I have lived inside that for 10 years. But that's not. He exhaled hard. That's not the same as wanting her back. I can't want her back. She's gone. What I wanted was to stop feeling responsible for killing her. And now Zylah is gone, and it feels worse than the fire did. He said it flatly, like a fact he hadn't wanted to confirm. It's not the same grief. It's not. I'm not mourning Seraphine when I think about Zylah leaving. I'm terrified. I'm actually terrified she boarded a plane, and I'll never. Then stop sitting here, Madame Solène said. He looked up. She is a real person in a real city making a real decision right now, she said. You cannot replay voice messages at her. Go find her. Meanwhile, across Seoul, Zylah was doing what she always did when things became too real. She moved efficiently. She called her friend Dessa and asked to stay on her couch without explaining why. She contacted the club and said she needed 2 weeks off. She opened her laptop and looked at flights. She booked one. One way. She told herself it was the right thing. He had history with Seraphine that predated her and ran deeper than anything Zylah could reach. If Seraphine was alive, Jaevian deserved the chance to face that without Zylah standing in the middle of it, making everything complicated. She almost believed herself. Then her phone rang. Not Jaevian. His investigator, calling the wrong person by mistake, leaving a voicemail she wasn't supposed to hear. Malric had fabricated everything. The photographs, the medical records, the witnesses. All of it built and planted specifically to make Jaevian chase a ghost, while Zylah watched and decided she'd never been enough. Seraphine had not survived the fire. Zylah sat on Dessa's couch holding her phone and feeling the floor shift under her. She needed to call Jaevian. She picked up her phone. Then she put it down. Because even if Seraphine was truly gone, she'd still seen the way Jaevian froze at that dinner table. She'd still spent months feeling like she was loving a man whose whole heart was already occupied. Malric had lied. That part was clear. But the doubt he'd planted had grown in real soil. She closed her laptop, then opened it again, then booked the flight. That night, Jaevian's investigator called him directly with the full report. Malric's paper trail was extensive and sloppy, the arrogance of someone who assumed he'd never be caught. Every fabricated document, every paid witness, every staged photograph. Jaevian read the report twice. Then he found something buried in the original fire investigation files he'd never been given access to before. Seraphine's personal financial records from the month before the fire. She'd been quietly moving money, not out of reach, toward a separate account she'd opened in both their names. She'd been planning to help him walk away from his grandmother's control. She'd been building them an exit. She hadn't just loved him. She'd been trying to free him. He sat with that for exactly 3 minutes. Then his phone showed him a notification from a travel app still linked to Zylah's account from when she'd used his laptop to book a trip months ago. One way, Seoul to Lagos, departing in 4 hours. He didn't call ahead, didn't send anyone, didn't arrange anything. He grabbed his keys and then put them down and called a driver because his hands weren't steady enough, and he sat in the back of the car in the same shirt he'd been wearing for 2 days and watched Seoul move past the windows. No bodyguards. He'd left without telling security, and his phone was showing 3 missed calls from his head of detail that he was not going to answer. The airport was crowded. Wednesday evening, peak hours. He moved through it faster than someone should be able to move through an airport and ignored every person who recognized him and stopped to stare at his face. Zylah was at the gate. Boarding hadn't started. She was sitting in the far corner of the terminal with her carry-on between her feet and her headphones around her neck, not in her ears. Staring at nothing. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was now just waiting for it to be over. She heard the noise before she saw him. A ripple of reaction moving through the terminal. People turning, people reaching for phones, someone saying his name out loud. She looked up. Jaevian walked toward her and stopped about 4 feet away and just stood there. He looked terrible, not in the polished, controlled way he'd looked at his worst during the media chaos. Actually terrible. Unshaved. Undone. Visibly operating on nothing. Phones were out everywhere. People were filming. He didn't look at any of them. Malric fabricated it, he said. His voice was not steady. All of it. The photos, the records, the witnesses. She didn't survive. She's been gone the whole time. Zylah said nothing. I know that's not. I know that doesn't fix everything, he said. I know I hesitated at that dinner, and I know you've been standing next to a man who was half buried for years, and I know I asked too much of you without saying out loud what you actually were to me. What was I, she said. Not a question exactly. He reached up and pulled his collar open. Right there. In the middle of a crowded airport terminal with 50 phones pointed at him. The scars were visible, jaw, neck, the top of his chest. 10 years of hiding. Done. You were the first person since the fire who made me want my own life back, he said. Not hers. Mine. You made me want to exist past what I survived, and I let you walk out of my penthouse without telling you that because I am bad at this and I was terrified, and none of those are good reasons. His voice broke on the last word. Fully broke. In public. On camera. In front of strangers. Seraphine was real, and I loved her, and losing her destroyed me. That's true. But losing you, he stopped. Breathed. Losing you is not grief. It's just wrong. It's just completely wrong, and I cannot let you get on that plane without you knowing that you were never temporary to me. Not for one single day. Zylah's eyes filled. She didn't move. She stood there with tears running down her face, and her flight boarding behind her, and 50 strangers watching, and she didn't say anything yet. Zylah stood there for a long time. Long enough that the gate agent made a second boarding announcement. Long enough that 2 strangers near them stopped pretending not to watch. Long enough that Jaevian's hands, hanging at his sides, started to shake slightly. She looked at him, really looked at him. The scars visible above his open collar. The exhaustion on his face. The man who had spent 10 years being terrifying to everyone because it was easier than being hurt again, standing in the middle of a public airport completely undone, asking her not to leave. She picked up her carry-on. He went very still. Then she put it on her shoulder and walked toward him and stopped directly in front of him. You can't hesitate again, she said. Not like that. Not ever. I know. And I'm not a replacement, and I'm not a consolation, and I'm not something you get to hold on to just because you're afraid of being alone. You're not any of those things. I need you to mean that. I mean it. She looked at his face for another long moment. Then she exhaled. Your dancing is terrible, she said. I need you to know that going in. Something moved across his face. Relief so complete it looked almost painful. I don't dance, he said. You will, she said. Badly. Publicly. And I will laugh at you every time. He reached out and took her hand. Malric's exposure was not clean or quiet. His fabricated evidence trail unraveled publicly over the following 2 weeks after Jaevian's investigator handed everything to 3 separate journalists simultaneously. The stalking documentation, the paid witnesses, the forged medical records, the planted photographs. All of it came out in a detailed sequence that left no room for interpretation. Malric issued one statement calling it a misunderstanding and then disappeared from public view while his legal team tried to contain the damage. He did not succeed. The hotel negligence story came out the same week. Not leaked by Jaevian. Discovered independently by a journalist who had been quietly reinvestigating the fire for 2 years after finding inconsistencies in the original report. Lady Mireille's buried safety records became front-page news within 48 hours. Jaevian did not try to stop it. His legal team called him twice asking for instructions, and he told them both times to let it run. His grandmother called him personally and told him he was destroying everything the family had built. The family built it on top of people who died because we cut corners, he said. I'm not protecting that. She was silent for a long time. Then she said something nobody expected. I told them to humiliate the girl at the banquet. Jaevian went completely still. I needed to see what you would do, she said. I needed to see if she would break and run, or if you would actually fight for something real. You were both too slow. But you got there. A pause. She's not what I would have chosen for you. I know. She's probably what you needed, she said. Then she ended the call. That was as close to a blessing as Lady Jaevian Seo had ever given anyone. The first time Jaevian played Seraphine's voicemail after Zylah stayed, he did it alone in the preserved room. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play and listened to all of it. The words, the static, the screaming. He sat there for a while after it ended. Then he stood up, turned the light off, and walked out of the room. He didn't lock it, but he didn't go back. He found Zylah in the kitchen arguing with Madame Solène about whether the soup needed more salt. Madame Solène was insisting it did not. Zylah was insisting she had taste buds, and the older woman was being stubborn. Neither of them noticed him for a moment. He stood in the doorway and watched them and felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in 10 years. Not happiness exactly. More like permission. Permission to be here. Permission to want this. Madame Solène looked over and caught his expression. She pointed a spoon at him. I did this, she said. Everything you are feeling right now is because of me. I want acknowledgement. You locked us in a wine cellar, Jaevian said. And it worked, she said. You're welcome. The event that mirrored everything was not planned. It was a small industry gathering 3 months later. Nothing formal. Zylah attended as herself, loudly, in a dress she'd chosen entirely to irritate the dress code, talking too much to people who found her either hilarious or overwhelming depending on their tolerance for chaos. At some point someone put music on. Zylah turned to Jaevian immediately. No, he said. Yes, she said. I don't dance. I know. That's what makes it interesting. He danced badly, genuinely badly, stiff in all the wrong places, half a beat behind, deeply uncomfortable and completely visible about it. Zylah laughed at him the entire time, not quietly, not politely. She laughed the way she did everything, fully and without apology. At some point she put her hand against the side of his neck, the scarred side, right there, in a room full of people, without lowering her voice or angling her body to block anyone's view. Just her hand against his skin like it was the most ordinary thing. He didn't move away. He put his hand over hers and kept dancing badly and let her laugh at him. And for the first time since the fire, Jaevian Seo stood in a crowded room and did not want to be anywhere else. That's the end. And I need a moment. This story was never really about a billionaire and a stripper. It was about two people who had both decided, for different reasons, that they didn't deserve permanence. Jaevian because of guilt, Zylah because of fear. And then they found each other and had to unlearn everything they'd been using to survive. That's not a small thing. That's everything. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt real, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And I want to know, which moment hit you hardest? Was it the airport? The banquet? The night she stayed when he woke up from the nightmare? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.